And welcome to Art in the Air. Today we have painter, teacher, and musician David Criner. He does a lot of abstract, large pieces, visiting themes as a student all the way to present. He likes to celebrate and lean into the existence of consciousness amidst stardust and rubble. And so welcome to the show, David.
Aloha, David.
Thank you, Larry.
Well, tell us.
Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you for being on the show. Tell us a little bit about your background, like where you grew up, where you went to school, all your different schooling and everything.
Well, I grew up primarily in the Midwest, and I ended up studying art eventually, although that's not how I started out. But eventually I ended up becoming a painting major at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. And then I went on to the University of Kansas to get a master's in fine art.
So where did you start out? You said you didn't start out with art. Where were you headed?
Well, it's kind of a long story. I mean, I always made art. I mean, since I was as young as I can remember, I made art and got a complete thrill and charge out of doing it. But I didn't really consider art as a career or a vocation. I didn't really seriously entertain that until I was about 20. And so it took me a while to kind of take the leap. And when I first did, it was a little bit frightening. I come from a place where if you tell someone you plan on becoming an artist, they laugh a little bit and want to know, well, how are you going to make a living?
Yeah, what's your real job going to be?
Right. Point. I don't even look back on it as a choice that I made, or even really as a profession so much as something that was much more of a calling. And I mean, it was something that found me early on, and it wasn't something that I could escape from.
So was it always the painting discipline, or were there other things that captured your artistic heart?
Oh, well, I drew and paint since I was very small, and then I guess I was about 13 or so when I decided to try to teach myself how to play a guitar. I was very determined, and there was nobody telling me to play the instrument. There was no one nagging me to practice or anything like that. It was completely my own volition and wish to pursue it and get better at it. And at one point I did take a little bit of lessons on the guitar for a few months. But for the most part, it's been something where I've learned on my own or in collaboration with others, like playing in bands, that kind of thing.
Wow, that's wonderful.
What kind of music did you play when you first started out?
Well, when I first started out, I wanted to emulate Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin and started studying his music through songbooks. I think early on I had a pretty good ear. I could pick out notes if I heard something, but I had a terrible sense of timing and rhythm. I had no concept of that, and it took me quite a while to develop that. It really I didn't get that sense of timing and rhythm until I started playing in bands in high school. And one of the bands that I played in the longest, I guess, we were called the Primitives, and the music that we played was all covers, but it was new wave rock and roll music, mostly from the 80s, maybe late 70s, that kind of thing. So I wasn't writing music really until about 2004 or so, when I found myself with another group that I was playing with called Forbidden Planet.
You have albums, correct?
Yeah, Forbidden Planet was the name of our band in the earlier 2000s, and we put together an album in 2007 that was called Action Suspense.
Okay. And I know one of the cuts from that says Touch of Evil.
Yes, that's right.
Band play mostly in the Chicago area, or did you?
Yes,
so
yes, entirely so. Yeah, we would play out at a few clubs and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Do you still play live?
Certainly, yeah, but I no longer play with a band. When I've performed in recent years, it's been just myself on my classical guitar, and most of the venues have been art galleries, actually. Sometimes I've played at other artists' openings, and then more recently I've played at my emotions for an audience at perhaps a closing, that kind of thing.
Played at the Nest.
I did. That's right.
While we're on your music, maybe we should have a sample of it. One of them, I think, is called End of Something. Tell us a little bit about that before we play that.
Oh, The End of Something. That's a very recent track that I wrote in collaboration with my friend Kirk Markarian. And we call ourselves DCKM. I'm DC, he's KM. And we've got this EP that we are just finishing up and getting ready to put out there. Our tracks are already available to listen on YouTube and Bandcamp. But The End of Something, it's a song that's just under 3 minutes. And like all of our music, it's instrumental, and it combines acoustic guitar with more digitized electronic kind of sound. I'm the guitar player in DCKM, and Kirk Markarian is primarily the sort of electronic angle of things.
You know, David, the collaboration is so exciting together, how each of your styles come together. It's really magical. I mean, the layering of it is just exquisite. I love it.
Well, I feel like, you know, I bring something to the table and Kirk brings something to the table, but at the same time, we each bring things out of each other that would not ordinarily be there if we were just working on our own. I can certainly say that about myself.
Well, you developed like it's a really complicated sound when they're blended together. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
I appreciate it so much.
Well, why don't we just take a listen to that? And that was a wonderful End of Something. And that's available on EP. Has that been released yet, David?
It hasn't been officially released, but you can preview it on YouTube And actually, it is available for purchase via Bandcamp, so you can find it there too.
Okay, very good. I noticed you had some interesting graphics that went along with it on the YouTube channel.
Oh yeah. So Kirk, my partner here, he and I developed the video for it, and the way it worked is Kirk asked me if he could use one of my paintings, and I said, okay, sure, take whatever you like. And so he selected one of my larger recent paintings, and then he manipulated it digitally and gave it this sort of pulsing kind of sensation.
And how do they find you on YouTube?
You can go to DCKM.
Okay, very good. You can find that, and you can see you have several works up there of music on YouTube.
Yeah, under DCKM we have 5 tracks that are up there at this point.
Very good. You're listening to Art on the Air, WVLP 103.1 FM, and on Lakeshore Public Radio 89.1 FM. So we get back to one of the other questions I wanted to explore is, we talked a little bit about where you grew up, but you kind of jumped where you grew up from, and I know about your teaching and everything, and how you ended up in Chicago, and a little bit more of that background for our audience.
Well, I've lived in a number of places, actually. I was born in Bethesda, Maryland. My father was in the Navy at the time, and a couple years after that, we moved to Indiana, very close to where you are right now. We lived in Chesterton, Indiana for a couple of years, and then we moved to Valparaiso, Indiana, and then my father got a job in Kansas City when I was, still in grade school, and then I spent most of my years growing up in the Kansas City area in suburbs there. But by the time I was, turning 18 or so, I kind of thought I wanted to go away. I wanted to go to school somewhere that would be new and different, and maybe I wouldn't know anyone, and I could just sort of reinvent myself. And I think that's partly what brought me to the University of Illinois back in 1987.
Very good. Yeah, I'm actually doing this from the home studio in Chesterton. Of course, Esther's in Michigan City, so we're doing this as a shelter in place. And so tell us a little bit how that's impacted you and what you're doing and everything, and then we'll also explore your teaching a little bit.
Yeah, well, okay, so, it's been, what has it been, like a month or so since...
more like six weeks, maybe?
Something like that. It's hard to even track time anymore. But I can't say that the isolation has significantly altered my work practice. With the music, of course, Kirk and I, we live in different parts of the country. Kirk Markarian lives in Tucson, Arizona, and I'm in Chicago. So even before the COVID crisis, he and I were sending musical files back and forth between each other and conducting, communication via the telephone and that kind of thing. I have not seen him face to face in, a couple of years or something like that. So we already were operating in a way that was completely conducive to the coronavirus. And then with regard to my painting, my studio, fortunately, is in my home. It's in the downstairs part. And, so I don't have to really change my work habits there. The only thing that I think I kind of felt the impact of is, I was scheduled to have an exhibition here in Chicago the middle of last month, and right at the last minute, I just had to pull the plug. I had a talk with Mike Rice, the gallerist, and he and I agreed, okay, let's postpone it. So that's still to be announced when we end up having the show. But gosh, other than that, how are things different? I guess one thing is I've become a little more mindful about the money I spend. In the past, I spent a considerable amount on art supplies, including paint, canvases, that sort of thing. And then more recently, I decided what's stopping me from just building my own stretchers and that kind of thing. I used to do it when I was a student, so I started doing that again, and now I can build a canvas for maybe an eighth of the cost, if I were to purchase it. And that feels good. I like feeling self-sufficient.
Indeed, yes.
And you say you also teach. Where do you teach? How do you teach? And how are you teaching now, actually?
So I taught at Northeastern Illinois University here in Chicago for 20 years now. And I've primarily taught painting and drawing at all levels. And in the past, I've worked at a few other schools, but in recent years, it's just been at Northeastern.
Very good. Go ahead.
Yeah.
So is it all video now, your classes?
Oh, the instruction, you mean?
Yes.
Well, the way I'm conducting instruction right now is primarily via email with my students. So my students will either upload images of their work to a drive, or they'll just attach the images of their work in an email and send it to me, and then I get back to them with written feedback. So it's very different, from the kind of hands-on, face-to-face interactions that we were having before all this. However, I don't find this new method to be completely lacking. In some ways, it might even have some advantages. And what are those advantages? I guess when I offer feedback as an instructor, and it's being written, it almost forces me to kind of think even more thoroughly about what I'm saying to someone, and think a little bit more carefully about the larger picture and all the possibilities that might be behind the work that we're discussing.
Students feel about it.
I'm sure it varies. I think some of them miss the old way, and for sure. And but I think that there are some of my students who almost seem like they're kind of thriving in this situation. It's surprising and unexpected, but there are some of my students who it almost seems like they are cranking out their best work. I don't know if maybe they needed greater independence, or certain people just sort of come alive in a crisis. I don't know what all the reasons are. I'm sure it varies, but it's been interesting.
A lot of times in instructing like that type of thing, you can actually watch their technique, and you almost can't do that in this situation. Watching.
No.
How do you think that impacts them?
How does it impact them, you're asking?
Yeah, how does it impact like the teaching style, and everything? You're seeing more of a final product when they deliver it, but you're not seeing as much process.
Well, I do have my students send me work in progress. I do have them send me images of drawings and paintings before they are finished. And I think because I have spent a number of years in the classroom watching and teaching that way, to some degree I'm able to kind of fill in the gaps, if you know what I mean, or sort of read between the lines. And so when I see an image of a work in progress, sometimes I can start to kind of imagine what happened before and imagine what potentially might happen next.
Very good. Well, now that you have a home studio and everything, are you getting stir crazy about being in the studio all the time?
Oh, not at all. No, I mean, I'm not really spending any more time in my studio than I would have been earlier. I get down there just as often, or about the same. I haven't really been that stir crazy. There've been some moments probably, but by and large, it's kind of strange. I almost feel like I'm acclimating to all this.
Well, I'd like to get back to your music because we're getting close to the end here. And one of the other songs that you wanted to share with us was The How and the When. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was the first song that Kirk Markarian and I completed when we first started collaborating around the first of the year, around the beginning of January. And the way that we developed the song, well, Kirk asked me, he said, I saw you performing this guitar number on social media, and I like it. How would you feel if you sent me a recording and I chopped it up and dissected it and reconfigured it in a way that makes sense to me? And I said, sure, go for it. And so that's exactly what he did. He took a song that I had written, a couple of years ago, and he completely rehashed it in his own way. sent the file back and said, well, now can you riff over that? Can you play your guitar on top of this in some way? And I listened to his recording probably a dozen times, scratching my head and sitting there with my guitar trying to come up with something and feeling like I was just spinning my wheels. But eventually something came to me and something started to kind of click. I was able to kind of build a rhythm on top of what he had created. What he had created sounded almost chaotic to me and without structure. So I had to kind of come in and provide the structure, which is often not the way that musicians work. I think more often than not, the structure comes first, the rhythm section, and then the details find their way in later. So we've worked in some unusual ways, but even after I riffed over what he did, I sent it back to him, and then he riffed over that. We often go back and forth a number of times before we really complete something. And, you know, there's some editing that goes in there too. Some of the material that we work on so far doesn't completely even take off the ground, you know, and we kind of back up and sort of start over. I think we got quite lucky with the how and the when. It just came together, and I can't explain really how any further than what I just told you.
David Criner, and beautiful music there.
I know we should encourage everybody to go to the YouTube because the visuals are really beautiful with all of them.
Thank you, Esther.
We have just about a minute or so. If you could wrap up a little bit about, we didn't really touch on your artistic style as much, but maybe give us a quick summary of that.
Well, if I were to talk about either the music that I create or the paintings, ultimately I see them both as a way of celebrating the fact that I'm alive, that I'm conscious, that there's a spirit that seems to move as part of me. So when I create, I tend to really not start out with any kind of goal usually or preordained notion of what it's going to be about, but inevitably that sense of celebration almost always finds its way in at some point. And it's taken me a while to kind of acknowledge that, I guess, and recognize it, and much less be able to verbalize about it. But if I had to kind of pare it down, that seems to be at the crux of it.
Okay. Any final thoughts for our audience about your work? Any proposed exhibitions coming up?
I've got this show with Mike Rice at the Clancy in Chicago that should be coming up at some point, not too far off in the future. I don't have an exact date yet. And then I have an exhibition coming up at the Garver Feed Mill in Madison, Wisconsin, scheduled for October at this point. It's a large exhibition space that also has stores and a bar and restaurants and that kind of thing. So I'm looking forward to that, and got a couple other shows a little further on down the line. But right now, I'm mostly just focusing on making the work and sharing it through social media, because we can't really share it in any other way.
Well, that sounds great. Well, we'd like to thank you for being on Art in the Air. That was painter, teacher, and musician David Criner, and we thank you so much for making this segment of Art in the Air great. You're listening to Art on the Air, WVLP 103.1 FM, and on Lakeshore Public Radio 89.1 FM.